All right, in another book from the Johns Hopkins University Studies in Historical and Political Science, and this is White Servitude in Maryland, 1634 to 1820 by Eugene Irvin McCormick, PhD, instructor in American History, University of California, and this is from 1904. As nearly all indentures were negotiable, they were regularly disposed of at auction or private sale. The following is an example of the notices which appeared in the papers whenever a servant ship arrived in port. It says here, just arrived in the ship Sophia, Alexander Berdine, master from Dublin, 20 stout, healthy, indented men servants with 20 people, it says, whose indentures will be disposed of on reasonable terms by the captain on board or the subscriber, etc. The price received for servants varied according to their skill, age, and other personal qualities, but the average price for adults seems to have been about 15 to 20 pounds. All right, people from Europe being sold, right, like property, people being sold. All right, we're continuing the book White Servitude in Maryland, 1634 to 1820 by Eugene Irvin McCormick. And in this chapter 5, it says Fugitive Servants. One of the most noticeable features of indentured servitude, and one which greatly impeded the successful operation of the institution, was the large number of runaways. All right, all these runaways. You thought it was just African slaves? No, it was indentured servants, large number of them, from the founding of the colony to the dying out of white servitude. From the very beginning, in the first half of the 19th century, there's abundant evidence that large numbers of servants deserted the service of their masters, and their apprehension was one of the most serious problems with which the planters had to deal. These slave catchers, who were they going after really? Indentured servants. Outside of the convict class, by far the largest number of runaway came from the ranks of the outcast and ne'er-do-wells from the cities of England and Ireland. All right, these outcasts, many of them fleeing from justice or suffering from the pangs of hunger, were attracted by the glowing accounts given by the agents and eagerly accepted this method of reaching the land of gold. They were induced, they were forced, they were kind of like schemed into coming over here and putting themselves in an indenture. It is not at all likely that these persons had any intention of fulfilling the conditions of the indenture and thought only of the free transportation to America. So a lot of these dudes are like, yeah, but when I get over there, first thing I'm doing I'm running away. I'm escaping. I ain't working for 7 years. These and the convicts became the professional runaways. All right, the convicts and all these outcasts. These were the runaways, not no African slaves. You understand what we're reading here? Like this is in Maryland, but this happened in the mass scale all over all these states where they had indentured servants. These same type of indentured servants, too, convicts and these outcasted people from Europe. From the publication of the first newspaper in Maryland till long after the Revolution, it is difficult to find a number whose columns do not contain from 1 to 10 advertisements for runaway servants. All right, we've seen a lot of examples of that already, right? All these newspapers during those times filled with runaway ads of servants. The Rise and Fall of Indentured Servitude in the Americas, an economic analysis by David D. Gilson. So here, the evolution of indentured servitude in colonial British America. Indentured servitude was an initial solution to an acute problem of obtaining a labor supply that existed in many regions of colonial America, and the basic form of institution developed by the Virginia Company was widely adopted and used throughout the British colonies in the 17th and 18th centuries. Although precise estimates of the total numbers of servants are not available, all right? They're not going to, so when they tell these estimates, like I always say, like they always saying 2/3 or about this percentage, that's them being modest. I'm telling you, it's guessing, but they know it's high, so they even tell you high. 2/3 or 80, 75% is high. An indication of their overall quantitative importance is given by Abbott Emerson Smith's judgment noted earlier that between half and 2/3 of all white immigrants to the American colonies after the 1630s came under indenture. Their importance at times in particular regions was even greater, as is suggested by Wesley Frank Craven's estimate that 75% or more of Virginia's settlers in the 17th century were servants. 75% were servants, indentured chattel property. Talking about Europeans settling in Virginia. All right, not Africans. Although initially all the servants came from England, in the course of the colonial period, migrants from other countries joined the flow of servants to British America, and especially in the 18th century, sizable numbers of Scottish, Irish, and German immigrants arrived in the colonies under indenture. Active markets for indentured servants arose in Europe and in the colonies. Hundreds of English merchants in the major British ports participated in binding immigrants for servitude overseas. Transportation costs varied little across individuals or destinations, and differences in the immigrants' productivity, which affected the rate at which they could repay the implicit loans, were therefore reflected in variation in the length of the terms for which they were bound. Surviving collections of indentures clearly show that characteristics that raised the expected productivity of a servant tended to shorten the term for which the servant was indentured. Thus, the length of the indenture varied inversely with age, skill, and literacy, while servants bound for the West Indies received shorter terms in compensation for their undesirable destinations. The presence of these markets provided a consistent link between European labor supply and the labor demand of colonial planters from the 1620s through the time of the American Revolution, again, all the way up to 1776. Indentured servants. So, where's the Africans? When did the slavery they started outlawing it? Like almost 1807, they're declaring it, right? The Act of 1807. So all the way to 1776, indentured servants. The efficiency of the institution within the colonies was further increased by the fact that indentures were generally transferable, and masters could therefore freely buy and sell the remaining terms of servants already present in America in response to the changes in economic circumstances. All right. In another book from the Johns Hopkins University Studies in Historical and Political Science, and this is White Servitude in Maryland, 1634 to 1820. It says here, the system of servitude, thus early established in Virginia, was adopted by Lord Baltimore as a means of settling and developing the colony of Maryland. To Porter send out settlers himself, he induced others to transport servants in return for grants of land in the new colony. All right, so he was trying to make people to finance, the transportation of these servants he wanted to colonize Maryland with. All right, this Lord Baltimore. All right. Many who did not wish to go in person furnished Baltimore money for transporting servants and received their pay in lands. The servants usually signed a written contract called an indenture, which bound them to serve a master for a specified number of years in return for free transportation, food, clothing, and 50 acres of land. Remember the headright system. From this contract, whether they signed it or not, all servants came to be called indented servants, whether they signed it or not. Remember, by force, they were bringing people over here. Concerning the motives which led Lord Baltimore to found the colony of Maryland, there have been much dispute among writers on toleration. By confining their attention to this religious controversy, they have apparently lost sight of the underlying principle in Baltimore's plans, which overshadowed all others, that of revenue. All right, it was a business. He wanted revenue. There is very little evidence to support the theory that Maryland was founded as a home for persecuted Catholics. All right, that's the story they told everybody. A majority of the first settlers sent out were Protestants. All right, Protestants. All right, just want to read something real quick here in chapter 3. It says, number and economic importance says the actual number of servants imported into Maryland and the ratio which they bore to the free inhabitants cannot easily be determined from the scanty records which have been left us. All historians of Maryland complain of the dearth of contemporaneous material. Outside of purely legal documents, the settlers have left us very few journals or records of historical value. All right, so now they're letting you know that here in Maryland, they don't really know how many indentured servants there really was, or coming in or anything, or if there was more indentured servants than slaves or more European indentured servants than so-called Negroes in indenture. You understand? So whatever numbers they ever gave you in history, it was all a lie. If they ever said, no, it was very few indentured servants here, it was more so-called Negroes here as slaves, well, that's a lie because they don't have any records. They're making things up. Or I just wanted to verify that here. They're letting you know here. Then it says, for some time after the founding of the colony, talking about Maryland, right, the servants came exclusively from Great Britain, Ireland, and Virginia. All right, not Africa, any of these servants. Of the original immigrants, the ratio of servants to freemen was probably about 6 to 1. All right, more servants than free men. In the Assembly of 1637, which all freemen were required to attend, only 90 appeared either in person or by proxy, leaving about 220 who must have been servants. This would make the ratio at this time 7 to 3. The increase in this proportion of freemen was due to the expiration of some of the servants' terms and to the immigration from Virginia. So freemen also included if there was a white indentured European and he did his time in 7 years and it was over, then he became a freeman. And we'll continue in the book White Servitude in Maryland, 1634 to 1820 by Eugene Irvin McCormick. We're in chapter 8 now, and they're talking about the convicts. And it says here, from the reign of James I, or King James, till the separation of the colonies from England, large numbers of convicts were annually transported to the 13 colonies, as well as the Barbados, Jamaica, and other islands, and influenced materially the history of both the mother country and the plantations. Plantations, these indentured servants, not Africans, to where to the West Indies, Jamaica, Barbados, and the other islands, not Africans, indentured servants. The English kings, ever solicitous about the want of laborers in America, kindly consented to send over all their unmanageable subjects to become servants in the plantations, a kindness not always appreciated by the colonists. Convicts were sent to Virginia and Barbados before the founding of Maryland, but after the settlement of the latter colony and continually throughout the colonial period, she received her share. All right, Maryland got a lot of convicts too, and in fact, a greater number than any other province. Mad convicts, a lot of the most convicts. Maryland was full of what? Convicts. The most were sent to Maryland, called Kurimeo, who made a special study of crimes and criminals in England. And speaking of transportation after 1718 says, the system continued for 56 years, during which period and until the commencement of the American War in 1775, great numbers of felons were sent chiefly to the province of Maryland. All right, all these felons. Available material furnishes no clue to the actual number of convicts sent to Maryland before the Revolution. Strauss has estimated the number at least 20,000, and the annual importation between the years 1750 and 1770 at 4 to 500. So they don't know. Remember, they have no clue. They don't know. They're making this up. They're being modest, and they're putting these in quotations. Remember, when they don't know something, they'll do this. They'll put their quotations on it, right? Because they don't really know. So, judging from the newspaper records of the arrival of convicts at Annapolis and Baltimore, this estimate is not too high, if indeed it is high enough. Other estimates have been made of the whole number of involuntary emigrants sent from the British Isles to the American plantations. Between 1717 and 1775, the number sent from the Old Bailey alone is thought to be at least 10,000, and the whole number from various places in Great Britain and Ireland at least 50,000. Says here the greatest number of the 7-year passengers, that's what they call them because they were indentured for 7 years, sent to the plantations were ordinary criminals from various jails of Great Britain and Ireland. Among them were men and women of all ages and descriptions. They represented all crimes, if some of the offenses may be so classed, some stealing a loaf of bread to sustain life, to highway robbery, all right, from petty crimes to big crimes, and a lot of them wasn't even their fault. They were just hungry. The worst criminals were seldom transported, but were executed in large numbers after every session of the court. The number was augmented at various times by the transportation of rebel convicts. Most of these were sent to the Barbados and other islands. They sent them to Barbados, right, so they couldn't escape. So a lot of these, when they say rebel convicts, what are they talking about? Like Jacobites, Quakers, Protestants, or what are they talking about? What kind of rebels? Most of these were sent to the Barbados and other islands, but during the 18th century, some were sent to New England, Virginia, and Maryland. In the summer of 1717, 135 Scotch rebels were sent to Maryland and sold as servants. All right? It is difficult to tell from the court records and state papers where the great number were sent, as there is seldom any more specific destination given than the plantations or the West Indies. All right, again, where? Plantations, working in the fields, cotton fields, but tobacco fields, sugarcane fields, yes. not Africans. These are indentured servants from where? Europe. And what did they have here? They had local labor as well. Your ancestors, the Aboriginals that were already here, right, working with these indentured servants. That was you over here. In the calendar of state papers for December 13, 1666, there is an interesting entry concerning the disposition of Scotch rebels. The resolution about the Scotch rebels is to hang all ministers and officers of the common sort. 1 in 10 is to be executed, one forced to confession, and the rest sent to plantations. The rebels sent to the West Indies in the 17th century were required to serve 10 years. In a letter of the king to the governor of Jamaica, he instructs the governor that all the late rebels sent to Jamaica, who's these rebels? Are these Jacobites? Who's these rebels being sent? All right, who are these people? Are these royal black nobles being sent to Jamaica and the West Indies Islands? It says, shall serve their masters 10 years without permission to redeem themselves by money or otherwise till that term be expired. The governor is ordered to propose a bill to the council and assembly for enforcing the order. The term of service for the Monmouth rebels, right? There we go, sent to Barbados was also 10 years, while ordinary servants were bound for only 4 years. Says the following are examples of many notices found in the magazines. All right, so this is an example of what they were saying in those times. It says 430 rebel prisoners from the gaols of Carlisle, Lancaster, Chester, York, and Lincoln from England, right, were transported this month from Liverpool for the plantations. All right, who? English people or English indentured servants to the plantations. 8 of them were drowned by boat oversetting, not being able to swim because they were handcuffed. So 8 of these prisoners or rebels drowned because they had them handcuffed and their little boat overturned. You see that? That's cruelty. This number with the rest makes about 1,000 transported. 105 felons, convict taken out of Newgate, the Marshalsea, and several other county gaols were put on shipboard to be transported to Maryland. Felons transported from Newgate, May 17, 1736, 4 for life, 3 for 14 years, and 100 for 7 years. You hear that? 4 were going to work for life. 4 were going for life, for life. Chattel property. You were what? An indentured servant for life. 4 of them already had that before going over there. These are Europeans, not Africans, and 100 of them for 7 years. The Maryland Gazette records the arrival of many convict vessels all through the 18th century. Loads of 50 to 100 or more were regularly landed at the ports of Baltimore and Annapolis, especially the latter city. The editors of the day frequently indulged in jokes at the expense of this class of immigrants. For example, the Maryland Gazette gives the following account of the arrival of a convict ship at Annapolis. And it says here, Friday, last arrived here from London after a passage of 29 days. All right, after a what? A middle passage. After a middle passage, right? They crossed the Atlantic, right? Oh, this one doesn't count? Oh, and this is not considered a slave ship? All right, so 29 days at sea, middle passage, Captain James Dobbins in the Thames frigate with 130 of His Majesty's passengers who were of the home, so expert and known in some arts that they were obliged to travel for the better peopling of His Majesty's American plantations, at least for the term of 7 years. All right, because of their arts, they were making fun of them. But the newspapers do not give a complete record of the arrival of these vessels in Maryland. The advertisements for runaway convicts often state that they came at particular time and in a particular ship, no account of which is given in the papers. Large, therefore, as the recorded numbers appear, the actual number was much greater. So even though we have some records of numbers, it was much greater. It was way more than they're telling us. Way more numbers of indentured servants over so-called African slaves. And we continue in the book White Servitude in Maryland, 1634 to 1820. And they get to the conclusion they're saying that importation of servants into Maryland from Great Britain and Ireland seems to have reached its height about the middle of the 18th century, talking about the 1700s. From the time down to the Revolution, the number of voluntary servants brought into the colony gradually diminished. Convicts, on the other hand, came in ever increasing numbers. So convicts were one of the major sources of Maryland. servants. And during the 20 years which preceded the revolution, Maryland received nearly all that were transported. After the revolution, Maryland was getting all the felons, all the convicts. As slavery was firmly rooted in Virginia, there was little demand for convict labor, and laws were enacted to exclude them. In Pennsylvania, the German immigrants more than supplied the demand for servants. All right, we got that already. All the German indentured servants that were there, and the convict element there was insignificant. But in Maryland, the contractors always found a ready market for His Majesty's passengers, in spite of their sentiment against them.